So our next item up tonight is Russ Siskin, who is a citizen of the town of Webster, a very accomplished entrepreneurial business owner who has opened and sold many businesses, but is also the CEO of, what's the clay once again?
Nova Ambulance.
Nova, Northern Onondaga Volunteer Ambulance in Clay, New York. And the reason why he is still in that position is he moved here about 10, 15 years ago from that area. Is that correct?
That's right.
And we have gotten the benefit of his subject matter expertise on ambulance EMS. And he is co-chaired for the last year plus with Councilman Cahill, who is the EMS ambulance liaison for the town board. So I can't thank Russ enough because it's all volunteer time on his part. I owe him, so you're up.
All right, so basically over the last year or so, or at least since last December, we've been talking about what the long-term options for EMS would be. And recently at previous meetings, we've talked about how we would produce a RFP, a request for proposal, and put it out to the local ambulance agencies to see if there are any ambulance agencies interested in responding to such proposal and be able to provide ambulance services to the town of Webster in lieu of the previous provider that is no longer in business. And so Monroe Ambulance and Penfield Ambulance originally responded to what we did as a pre-RFP questionnaire that we put out just to get some basic information from the potential agencies that might respond that would help us and inform us on how to write the RFP. And then we sent a formal RFP out in mid-October, and both Monroe Ambulance and Penfield Ambulance responded to that by the deadline of November 18th. And we have just received those as today is the 21st. We got those a couple of days ago, right on the deadline. Mm-hmm. And so now the committee that I'm on with John Cahill will review those RFPs and give some feedback or recommendations to the board on what we have found in them, and if there's any further questions, we can go back and ask those as well, but that's where that process stands. And on the next slide. So one of the other things that we're asked to consider is, what about, since the town has the authority to operate an ambulance, which is not normal, most towns do not have that authority. The town of Webster does. What about letting the town operate an ambulance, build an ambulance service here internally with employees and own the ambulances and own a building? So we've looked at that, and one of the things that, as Supervisor Flaherty has mentioned, is I'm the president and CEO and founder of an ambulance that's maybe a little bigger than the town of Webster would have. So I built it from the ground up. I know what it would take to build it, and I know what the cost would be. I try to translate the historical costs into what it would be in around 2024, and that's what you can see on the slides in front of you. You know, in other words, at the low end, you've got that one column that'll tell you that's about payroll would be about $2 million the first year. We'd have to buy about $1 million worth of ambulances and a facility that might be about $2 million if we were to get a facility that may be pre-existing on the high end, and that adds up to $5 million. And then you can see those numbers on the high end where payroll could go. Again, not knowing exactly what the ambulance revenue would be and what the ambulance need would be. We have a good idea, but not an exact need. And the ambulances on the 1 million column would have been more on the used side. On the 2.4 million, that would be on the newer side. And I'll give you folks an example. I just bought an ambulance about 2 weeks ago, empty, $216,000. Okay? Then you put a stretcher in it. Nowadays, if you've seen ambulance services, you've seen, the stretchers aren't the old days where you got a couple of hefty people lifting them. You push a button, lift up a 300 or 400 pound person, which is nice for our paramedics. It's not straining the back, so we can have older people to work with. Those stretchers are $40,000 for the stretcher, and about $20,000 for the equipment in the ambulance that it sucks it in. So that's about $60,000. Now a defibrillator, when I first started, from those of you who remember Roy and Johnny, those defibrillators used to be $2,000 or $3,000. Now we have very complex cardiac monitoring, defibrillation, things that, all kinds of extra equipment in that defibrillator that we didn't used to have, that measure oxygen levels and carbon dioxide levels. About $50,000 or $60,000 for one of those per ambulance. That's three. So an ambulance, a stretcher, and just that one piece of equipment, we're already up to about $250,000. So if you had to buy enough of those, which we assume, based on what I know what we might need here and what I do when I'm a company I run, we need 4 to 6 ambulances. So you're up at about $2.5 million to fully outfit those ambulances here. Along with, if you had to buy a building, a small building, say 5, 6, 7,000 square feet, you may be at 5 million. We have a 15,000 square foot building. If I had to replace right now, it would probably cost about $15 million. And $1 million, for 5,000 square feet. So you can see where, that range goes from 5 million to about 10 million to get into this business. And then the projected revenue there of about 2 to 3 million. That first year, obviously, that would be a problem. We'd need somewhere between 3 and 7 million, right? That would be the deficit. We'd need that money to get this thing going. And where would that money come from? Well, that would obviously would have to come from somewhere. Taxes, donations, something, but it's a lot of money. I mean, you can see the asterisks. It talks about why, some of the payroll, that would include pensions, which is, hey, if the town had one, the one thing we wouldn't necessarily have trouble with is getting EMS providers. I have EMS providers. Boy, if they could get a pension, I'd probably lose them, right? Because we don't have that available in what we do, in any event. And the other variability on, why is there such a variance in the income of about $1 million, or, about 50% variance there, right? Is there's this thing called payer mix. Medicare pays so much, Medicaid pays so much, Medicaid pays so much, and then private insurance pays a bit more. You have to take into account what percentage of your people that you're taking to the hospital are Medicare, Medicaid, and private insurance. We have an idea of what that is based on some numbers we got from the previous provider and the folks that are doing service for us now, but we can't be 100% sure. So it's a hard one to predict perfectly. In any event, the committee is recommending that that's not a great option for long-term for the town. So out of our job of looking at the RFPs and looking at potentially building it, as a person who's built it, we're recommending that it's not a great option, based on, not only the numbers, but, the cost to run an ambulance, get it up and going is pretty high. The volatility in the EMS industry, it's one of the things is it's not very well supported in New York State. I think you went to a conference that talked about that.
Yes.
We're not even, as a paramedic, we're not considered essential workers in New York, if you can believe that. You know what that means to be considered essential workers in New York? It means the government funds you and guarantees that you're going to be there. We're not guaranteed. U.S. citizens of New York State are not guaranteed ambulance service. There's nothing, there's no laws, there's no regulations that guarantee that. And it's not getting any better. So if anybody wants to be legislatively involved, let me know. I can bring you on the team. Obviously, it's a bit small for the, even though the town of Webster it's got a reasonable volume of ambulance calls. It's going to probably be 4,000 or 5,000 maybe 3,000 to 5,000. The economies of scale are just barely there at those numbers. When you're doing 6,000 to 10,000, all right, now you got a reasonable business model, and that's one of the things as CEO president, I look at the business model. It'd be very hard to sustain at that level, and you can't go out and make ambulance calls, not legally. You're hitting people's cars. That's probably not the right way to do it. And the companies that respond to the RFPs have significantly higher call lengths, and they can benefit from those economies of scale. And that last bullet goes sort of back to what I was saying, the controversies in the way the government is treating this. We see the government pushing towards consolidation and say, well, ambulances should be run by counties, right? I don't know how they're gonna do that, take all these private companies and make counties take them over, but that is where the push is going. And we've seen a lot of ambulances go out of business. I think in this county, we've seen more than half of them that existed 10, 20 years ago are no longer in existence. So for that reason, we're recommending, that's one thing we can recommend today is to not do that, not start the ambulance business here. And look more towards outsourcing to the third parties to fulfill our ambulance needs.
Thanks, Russ. Any questions or comments from the board members?
My question doesn't really matter because I couldn't agree with you more that I don't think this is something, certainly as a town board member, I have an appetite to pursue. And I guess I have two questions. One is, would it be fair to say, Russ, that that you did start an ambulance service many years ago? If it were today, I can assume that you might not jump into something like that?
Again, if it was a 10,000 call
Right,
area,
yes,
potentially.
okay,
I mean, most of the ambulance services in New York State, the smaller ones are all 501c3 not-for-profit.
right,
So nobody, I'm not doing it, I don't make money, I'm not a stockholder or an owner, and most of us aren't. So if you just wanted to, but if you needed to have an ongoing concern, a business that could be self-sustained, yeah, at about 10,000 calls, it would be a reasonable thing to consider.
okay.
I think you'd have to be a little crazy, but you could.
That actually leads right into my next question, and that is, if this were a municipal service that the town were to start up and take over, we would not be a not-for-profit, and I don't think donations is something we could accept.
Well, true, but the other thing is that I can tell you the donation, us being a 501c3 is historical, and it is as for most of the ambulance companies. We haven't made, the last time that we did a fundraiser, we made $13,000 in net, and that was 20 years ago.
Right, but then
And that
again,
was when we used to be 100% donation based, when our budget was $60,000. Our budget last year was $6 million. So 13,000 is just, it's not worth the effort. actually.
no, but also, if we were to exercise our CON as a municipal-owned ambulance service, we would not be able to accept donations, because it would be completely different than the not-for-profit.
Right, but again, I think, if you, I don't know, maybe the township of Webster would, maybe we'd be very donation friendly, but you wouldn't be able to know.
Thank you, I appreciate the information, and it just confirms my thoughts on it.
Thank you, Russ. Thank you also for your expertise, your knowledge, and the significant amount of hours that you have put into this endeavor in the past year.
Well, hopefully we'll have a good look at these RFPs and have some more feedback for you in the weeks, not months, but in the weeks to come.
Looking forward to that information.
Thanks, Russ.
All right.